Welcome to the Private Equity Experience Podcast, your backstage pass to the strategies, stories, and secrets that drive value in the PE universe. No filters, no fluff, just straight talk and expert insights to help you navigate the private equity world with confidence. And now your hosts, Ed Barton, Rory Liebhardt, and Emily Sander.
Welcome back to the Private Equity Experience Podcast. How's it going, Rory? How's it going, Ed?
Man. Good to be back. Yeah.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
You got some nifty headphones there, Rory.
Yeah. Well, we finally figured out my technical difficulties, it seems, after many weeks.
You've gone full circle.
Yeah.
Now you're like, you look like one of those like NFL announcers who's like ready to go.
Exactly. Yeah. I'll put me up there with Chris Collinsworth, and
I love him.
He's good.
He's one of my favorite.
Yeah.
I cannot stand freaking, who is it? Greg Olson and
Troy Aikman.
Troy Aikman. Yeah, I don't know, but Chris. Yeah, I love him.
Yeah.
We're here to talk about selling. So why would a founder want to sell?
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, if you're building a business and, you've bootstrapped it, or maybe you can taken on some seed investment or angel investment, at a certain point in time, you've taken your business perhaps as far as you can take it organically, or maybe there's some mitigating factors if you're a founder without any successors in your family or something like that. And you make the decision of whether it's time to sell and who to sell to.
Cool. So what are some of the reasons people could be considering this? You mentioned some of them, but if they're just like retiring, they're just like, I've done what I need to do here, and now it's time for something else to happen.
A lot of times, what I've seen is really there's a couple key drivers. The biggest key driver is a need to diversify. The most successful entrepreneurs pour their heart, soul, and entire balance sheet into their business. And once that business has gotten stable and they're doing fairly well, and this is where that lifestyle business to private equity tension comes in. They've done really well, but they've tied up their entire life into their business, financially, emotionally, physically. And so they're like, look, I want to take some chips off the table. That's the number one reason I see. The number two reason that I see is related to that, which is they and their partners have tied up all their lives, and it's almost like a marriage. Mm-hmm. And every one of those, I've never seen a partnership go for decades and decades and decades without tension, just like I've never seen a marriage go decades and decades and decades without tension. And when that tension hits, depending on how they work through it, there's sometimes a need to bring in a third party or a fourth party or a fifth party to kind of settle down the ownership group, or to take out the partner that's like, look, I'm done. And then they want to ride off into the sunset, and you've got another partner who wants to stay and build the business. Those have tended to be the two drivers outside of I need growth equity capital.
Yeah. Nothing is permanent, right? So you're talking about many years of building. There's another stage to any business typically, and that's, selling or liquidating, or really taking, as Ed said, taking some chips off the table.
Yeah. So we work with several founders, and let's talk about the ones we work with together. Like, what were the reasons they were initially entertaining private equity?
Well, if I go back to my first, so not ones where Rory and I first worked together, we had basically angel investors that built that business, that ranged from former Federal Reserve Board chairman to, kind of local real estate developers. And they essentially were like, look, we've been in for 10 years. Right. This business has gone gangbusters. Yeah. We're going to take our money off the table, and you need institutional money. So that's what was why our first private equity deal got done, was the business had grown to the point where the angels wanted out, or the seed investors wanted out, and they wanted to be replaced. They wanted to monetize, and the founder did not want to exit at that point. So a majority of the business was sold to private equity. And then the subsequent sale there was the founders and the private equity team weren't getting along. Right. And so they decided to exit the private equity guys decided to exit the business, and the best way for them to maximize their value was to sell the entire business. And when I think, they had drag rights, so they basically could force the other shareholders to sell, including the founder. But they were like, we want to get out, and we'll sell our portion, but we actually can make more if we sell the whole business. So they sold the whole business.
Okay, so let's get into drag rights and tag rights. What is that?
So drag rights are when, and normally it's a private equity guys that put this in the deal, and it's essentially says, look, if we go to sell our portion of the business, we can drag you along with us. So we can force you to sell at the same terms as we're getting for our sale. So normally it's the drag rights include and it's at the same terms or conditions. Again, we've talked about waterfalls, and so, they're whatever is in that category of the waterfall, they get treated the same, but they're forced to sell. They don't have a choice. Tag rights are when the private equity guys go, we're going to sell our 40% or 50% or 60%, and the founder or whoever the other shareholders go, we're going to sell too.
Yep.
And so we're going to tag onto that sale. And if you're going to sell 60%, you could only sell your proportional interest, because we're going to sell our proportional interest as well.
So why are drag rights beneficial to the PE firm?
Because that way they can force a sale of the entire business. And so a buyer is not necessarily stuck with minority shareholders.
Yeah, it's one of those.
cleaner.
It's one of those things where you negotiate a deal, and it's sort of potential outcomes early on, so that maybe you're going to avoid litigation. Not to say that drag rights aren't litigated; they routinely are. But if you have an understanding at the time you acquire a business from whom you bought it from, you can avoid that down the road. It's just like any other contractual term. You try to get things out on the table and agreed to before stuff hits the fan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's just cleaner, like when you're trying to do deals, like it's the whole company is being sold or going with you.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the advantage of tag rights, the opposite direction then?
Well, just as if you're another shareholder, minority shareholder, then you have the opportunity to get in on the same deal that the PE group who's selling perhaps the majority share of their interest in the business is. And, riding the coattails, one way to put it, but, you're basically tagging along with somebody that's got a vested interest in maximizing the value of their deal.
When would like a PE firm want to leave someone behind where someone's like, no, I'm tagging on, like I want to come with you?
Well, there could be any number of reasons that maybe it's just time to sell. Their fund, the private equity fund itself, is past its prime, time to liquidate, time to go raise another fund. So I mean, one of the things we talked about in a previous episode, and certainly speak a lot to in the book, is like these sequential timing of funds, and that could be one reason. Is just like, hey, it's time to liquidate. So, and there's not, unless you have that tag right, there's nothing that compels the PE group to sell the entire company as opposed to their share in the company.
Okay, so it's scenario based, which makes sense, but sometimes the PE is like, I would rather you just stay behind here and we exit.
Personally, I've seen drag rights, enforced way more than tag rights. I don't hear a lot about tag rights being a thing, because usually, as you said, Emily, I mean, there's usually alignment between the selling parties and you're on the same page. But drag rights is one where I have personally experienced it where that happens.
Okay, so drag and tag rights are terms and conditions that one would include or I was not try to have not included in the overall agreement between founders, companies, and the PE firm.
Right.
Yeah. That's where that comes into play.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned the waterfall, and we have mentioned that before, but that's super important. So I just wanted to make that clear. Like the waterfall is how would you describe this? Like the sequence or the order at which people get paid out.
Yep.
So it's very important to know what
so when a company sells, or when there's a distribution of cash out of the company, so it may not sell it, just maybe there's excess cash to distribute. There's an order in which that's done, and normally that starts with senior debt, then mezzanine debt, then preferred preferred dividends, then preferred stock, then common, and option holders are at the bottom. So it essentially says until these folks are paid off, and the waterfall is all spelled out in the combination of the operating agreement for the company and the deal terms when you enter into the deal. So you're going to have kind of a couple docs to look at, but it essentially spells out for each dollar, who gets that dollar, and when they're paid off, then it waterfalls, cascades down to the next layer, and then they get paid off. Then it cascades down to the next layer until at the very bottom is normally your employee option holders and warrant holders and kind of the folks who actually generated a lot of that value.
But depending on the source of the waterfall, there could be no water at the end, or it could be like a baby trickle.
Oh yeah,
That's
yes. I've actually
true.
I've been at waterfalls where it was like the Sahara Desert down where I was sitting. There was nothing. There wasn't even a trickle. There was nothing.
Yeah.
Well, and we've been in situations, we won't name names necessarily, but some very savvy founders who said, no, we want to be preferred at the preferred level versus what
we're going to, if you're investing in our company, we're going to be pari passu. We're going to be exactly the same as you are. So we're going to sit side by side with you on the waterfall. And then at the bottom of the waterfall is going to be the employee options. So they sat right next to the private equity folks. And that, again,
that's not
that
normal,
worked out
though.
well. No, that's not. But they negotiated
They
it.
knew about that.
They knew about it, and they negotiated well.
So that kind of speaks back to the, one of the first questions is why do you sell your business? And I guess I would say one of the things we didn't talk about we should is just the simple fact of sometimes a founder is convinced it's time to sell a business. That's what private equity groups do is they go develop relationships, they go search for businesses that are at a certain point in their life cycle. And, they effectively can tell a story to the founder. And a lot of times it's true, and talk about the potential for their business if they do certain things that may be outside of what the founder thinks about, or even conceives, because, they're busy running the business day to day. Maybe they don't have the vision of the market maybe that a private equity group does. So, I mean, that's to say that, some of these deals are just like any other deals where, there's two parties coming together having a discussion and they think 1 + 1 can equal 3. And so they decide to lock arms and do it, that's very common.
So besides the waterfall structure, what should a founder be thinking about when they're evaluating private equity as an option? I mean, we talked about some of the most common reasons, but if someone's, listening and saying, all right, I kind of have a sense of what this thing is. There's a lot of different PE firms out there. I want to make sure it's a good match. Like, how do I, what do I look for?
That's like a 6-episode series. But the one outside of the economics and kind of the deal terms and conditions, which are going to be things that you're going to want to negotiate out with any private equity partner. There's two elements that I think are absolutely critical when you're getting into a deal with a private equity team. The first one is, are you really aligned on what the strategy is? So not the BS, yeah, I agree, but I'll just deal with it later. They're never going to kick me out. They're going no, are you really aligned? And then the second piece, and this is almost as important, is think about your hiring as a CEO, you're hiring board members. And use some of the same criteria that you would use when you're hiring key members of your executive staff, when you're partnering with your private equity firm. So are these folks, are they smarter than me? Are they going to add value? Are they going to bring something unique? Are they going to strengthen my management team? Are they folks that I could sit on a plane with for 12 hours and fly to Dubai and not want to throttle them the entire way? And if you can answer yes to those things, so you go, look, I'd hire these guys for this executive team, and we're aligned on the strategy, you're probably, outside of the deal terms, you've probably got those subjective items fairly well nailed.
Yeah. I mean, not to be, too simplistic here, but do they understand your business? And, talk about alignment on strategy, that's one thing, but really, do they understand, the nuts and bolts of the business the way that you do? And maybe the answer is no, and it's still okay, but if it's yes, and you really have that mutual understanding, it can be extremely fruitful partnership, So, really getting to know who your suitors are is super important, early on in the process, no doubt about it. A lot of times, just like any other relationship, you'll know pretty quickly. Usually it's not love at first sight, but it's you'll know if there's some chemistry there for sure.
It might be, what was that line in My Fair Lady where it's, I've become accustomed to his face.
It should be a little bit different than that, but that actually, as you're going through the private equity, as you're going through the dating process, the meetings, the management meetings, fireside chats, and all the other happy stuff where you're utilize your instincts a little bit too. And look, if dealing with the private equity guys is like going to the beach and getting sand in your swimsuit, but they give you a good deal, you really got to think whether that's a really good deal and whether you can live with those folks for the long haul, because it may be that you end up taking a little bit less ideal economic deal to get the right partnership that'll then drive the business value higher.
Yeah.
So it is like a hiring process. It's like a marriage. It's like all those relationship things, and view those experiences during the lead up to the close, whether it's the initial meetings, the fireside chats, the diligence process, as kind of the dating game. Mm-hmm. And if you're like, F this, these guys are horrible, then I don't hesitate to rely on your instincts there.
Yep.
Okay, so let's play the private equity dating game. The first date is, there's virtual data room. You got to build your virtual data room.
You're way ahead of that. You're ahead of the game already.
Okay. Is that okay? So we're not even to like building our profile, because that's kind of like your.
Yeah, you're kind of building your Tinder profile.
Yeah.
So and that's the sim.
You're uploading some pics, maybe a little bio. Yeah.
They get a teaser. A teaser will go out, like a one-page teaser goes out from the investment bank. That's like your Tinder profile.
And your best picture.
And they fire that off to like everybody that they
on a hike. Yeah. Exactly.
And most people are going to swipe left. They're basically going to go, yeah, not interested, not interested, not interested, not interested. But every once in a while, you're going to get a swipe right. And that's the job of the investment bankers, is to get that out in front of as many people as they can and get it to the right folks, so you get the right people swiping right. And that's going to be your teaser.
So what's the CIM? So like, what are we talking about? It's CIM.
CIM, Confidential Information Memorandum.
And that's like a
much more than a
memo
than
or
what
like,
you think about when you think about
or
a memo.
a packet. It's like a packet
packet
of information.
Yeah, I've worked on
and we would
several
get CIMs all the
100-page
time.
CIMs with Ed, before. Yeah.
Hundreds?
Hundreds.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's ones I see are like 15 to 50 pages, like boom, boom.
That's because we're simple people and do simple Tinder profiles. Okay. But no, so you basically have this teaser that goes out, and then the CIM is the next piece that goes out. So the people who get the teaser go, yeah, this looks like a nice profile. I'd like to get to know a little bit more. And so they go back to the investment banker and they go, I'm going to sign an NDA, and then give me some more. And then the CIM comes out, and the CIM has got some financial information. It's got more business information. They may even disclose at that point, who it is, kind of what's going on with the business, why they're selling. That's really like that's the cyber stalking piece of the online dating experience. So now you've started to exchange text messages. You're looking at their Instagram.
You haven't spoken to the actual company yet, have you?
No, but you're looking at their Instagram.
You have like their full profile before
you've got their full profile.
Yeah.
You're checking out their Instagram. You're checking out their Facebook page. You've also got like a friend in the middle, and that's the investment banker that's going
mutual friend. Yeah,
they're
wing
really cool.
person.
They're great. Okay. And then if you make it past that stage, then you meet for the first time.
Fireside chat.
Typically just the CEO at first, actually, of the operating business. CEO and or founder, yeah.
Okay.
Because at that point, you may not even, really be, looping a lot of people from the operating business into the tent. Because unless you really think there's a deal to be done, you're not going to get people spun up to, take their eye off the ball from a day-to-day operating perspective. So
don't want to distract
my
them.
experience has been it's usually the CEO that has those first conversations, and that could be a couple months before even the CFO knows that there's like actual stuff happening. And that's just the job of the CEO, I'll say, as much as anything is, sell product and always be selling stock also. Like that's what they do, so.
Keep raising funds.
Yep.
The virtual data room, kind of going back to your one comment, the virtual data room, the assembly will start at the time at which that initial teaser is put together, but it continues all the way through the process. And really that virtual data room, it used to be a physical data room, now it's virtual, is handled by the investment banker. So they basically have a setup where they can figure out who goes in to see stuff, what they look at, and they'll give incrementally more access as you move through the process.
Yeah.
And so as Rory noted, at some point, normally the CFO gets brought into the tent next after the CEO because they need to fill out the data room. And CFOs tend to have a lot of the information that's needed to fill that data room out.
And I will say this, if you are on top of your game, then you will have good corporate hygiene, and you'll effectively have much of the information required for a data room in some sort of repository on the system anyway. So financial information, contract information, customer information, all of those things, do yourself a favor, even if you're in a business that, isn't likely to necessarily transact at any specific time, but just have information at your disposal so you don't have to recreate the wheel, in a rush or in a disorganized fashion. So
It's probably good for you anyway, regardless if you partner with private equity. But certainly if you do, you're ahead of the game, or you're prepared well and you're not scrambling.
Yeah.
But okay, so do a quick recap. You have the teaser, and then you have the CIM, and then you've got the fireside chat, and then you've got virtual data room at various levels of access. And so you kind of go through that. If you're like full kimono virtual data room and you're meeting with the CEO, the CFO, and maybe some other members of the leadership team, that's pretty far down.
Yeah, at that point, that's a great point, Emily. That's about where you usually start getting first LOIs, generated by potential buyers through the investment bank, and sort of you have typically a handful of effectively offers for your business, whether stock or asset purchase, to cull through. And that's sort of like where you start to narrow the field of your dating prospects, so to speak, and think about a long-term relationship.
Oh man, commitment. Okay.
Yeah, it's not quite monogamous at this point. It's to continue this analogy, I guess, for the rest of the episode. You're still talking, actively dating with other groups, and you actually want them to know that too. For a lot of reasons. So.
Yeah, and I'll leave any additional comments about corporate hygiene and any parallels alone for the moment. However, what I will say is a good CFO, and Rory had kind of hit on this, a good CFO knows, especially if you're in or contemplating a private equity type transaction, or you're in a private equity relationship, you're going to transact. And so a good CFO is constantly keeping their books, records, all those elements that are going into a virtual data room ready so that, like, at a moment's notice, they can kind of fire it over and it's not a super heavy lift. And the entire organization then is used to that cadence of providing information and loading it. So it also doesn't tip off that all of a sudden there's something new, exciting, and weird going on, because the organization is used to having that cadence of information flow and providing it up to the CEO, and the CFO is always asking for sales pipelines and all these other components. So be thinking about that as a chief executive or a chief financial officer. You want to have that cadence, not just during the process, but kind of throughout the process, especially once the process closes and you're now in private equity land. You're going to transact again. You do not, to go back to the analogy, you will not mate for life in private equity, and therefore you need to be prepared to transact and keep that cadence up. It's much easier that way, and it keeps the antenna down for the employees, and they can focus on executing their jobs rather than speculating about what the company's next transaction looks like.
Yep.
Okay, so we're running through this process with hopefully multiple potential buyers. We kind of want to let people know, hey, like I'm pretty popular. I'm hot stuff. I got options here, so you better up your game. And all throughout that process, all those different touch points and phases and stages, you're basically kind of seeing, like, do I want to take that 15-hour plane ride with this guy or gal? Do I want to do business and bring them on the board? Do I want, like, is this someone I can do business with? They're, of course, sniffing you out as well during that whole process, but that's the, like, I don't know, like mating dance that you do
That's
when
right.
you're
Yeah.
reporting private equity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, you know, they're assessing you, especially if you're the CEO, sometimes the CFO, founder, like they're assessing, you know, your character, your forthrightness, per se. And from their standpoint, can I work with this person? Like, hey, we have big visions for this business, but how obstinate or how open-minded are they going to be to accepting, you know, our expertise in this sector to make this thing massive, i.e. 1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing. So it goes both ways. Even though everybody's very happy and jovial up front, there's absolutely a two-way assessment going on personnel-wise.
Yeah. The honeymoon will wear off at some point. Just know that. And is this the person you want to be in bed with, so to speak? Also, I mean, if you look at it from their perspective, if you are about to give someone millions of dollars, wouldn't you want to know as much as you can about them? And wouldn't you want to know who you're doing business with? So it's a fair assessment.
Big time.
On the flip side, are there any red flags of here's who should absolutely not partner with private equity? Like, these are absolutely no-go situations if you have one of these.
Well, if you like having a chill 35-hour, 40-hour work week, cash and dividends, taking money out of the business, it's probably not right for you.
No.
If you like running a balance sheet that's debt-free, probably not for you. If you're not up for sharing control of your business that you may have been conceptualizing, incubating, running for 10, 15 years, that could be a challenge. You know, it could be a shock to the system if you have new players in the game.
Yeah. And we've seen that we've seen someone get like electrocuted in their head and it's not pretty, but they weren't ready for it. They needed to read this book, our book, but they weren't ready for it. They didn't understand that. And it was frustrating because being on the leadership team was like, this is just creating drama and churn and everything. But at another level, it's kind of like this poor person who this has been their baby for decades and decades is now having to get used to something totally new.
You know, it's amazing.
As a matter of fact, I see that more often than not.
Yeah,
when I look at my career and the private equity backed companies that I've been a part of, in almost every one of those circumstances, which is one of the reasons why we're gathered here, the founder has been like, what the heck just happened? Now, some of them, and again, I've got situations where some of them, the founder goes, okay, I get it. That's fine. That's cool. I'm going to adjust. I'm making those adjustments. We're bringing in new folks. I'm stepping away, you know, and again, we were all part of one where that was kind of the case, where the founders kind of realized what was going on and they stepped away. Emily alluded to one that the two of us were at where that was not the case, and it became a very contentious, and Rory and I were in one where it was contentious as well. And I think it's just, you know, that challenge for the founder is just recognizing, for the most part, it is the control piece. They're used to, this has been my baby and I'm in total control, and that's not the case anymore. And like I said, if you're well aligned on strategy and you can communicate well with your private equity partner and you guys get along well, it's going to be like any relationship. There's going to be bumpy times, but you'll generally be successful. And that's what I've seen in my most recent is, you know, that situation occurred. So even when it got bumpy, they were able to work through it and transition successfully. In other cases, if you go into it because you're trying to get the best dollar amount, you may end up with, you know, you're on the outside looking in as the founder, because the private equity guys will control that situation. And if you're prepared for that, you know, that's fine, but normally you're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that dynamic is just so interesting always, because you think about successful founders, and sometimes, well, I'd say most times, to be successful, you have to be so singularly focused, quite brilliant, and, you know, really used to basically being top down in how you run the business. You are that person, and that's what makes you successful. Now, here's that conundrum to say, well, for whatever reason, I'm deciding it's time to, you know, sell this business, and a lot of founders think that they can handle that transition, but until you actually are in it, let's say 6 months into the post-sale phase, where you're now operating the business under PE ownership, that's when it really starts to sink in. There's a heck of a lot more governance required. There's a heck of a lot more administration, things that you might not otherwise have been used to, and you have to find within yourself whether you can handle that or you want to, you know?
Well, to that point, I mean, at about the 6-month mark, there comes a point where something happens and they basically get told that's not your call, that's not your decision anymore, and that just can
Usually a second board meeting,
crumble.
Legit.
yeah,
And that's where someone can literally just dissolve in front of you, and it's kind of a kick in the pants.
yeah,
And some people recover from that and are like, all right, I understand that. Here's what I always tell executives in this position: you still add value to the business, tremendous value. The way you do that has changed.
yeah. Great point.
And as soon as you can
Really
get
good
on
point.
board with that notion, it's better for you, it's better for everyone around you. But people, man, they fight that, and it's hard and it's tough. But I mean, we've also seen people who truly, genuinely are trying to make that transition. It's hard for them, but they're trying to, and they eventually get there, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think, and I think a lot of these cases where there is a challenge adapting, you know, the founder or the majority shareholder thinks, you know, it's all worth it for a lot of money, and then they get the money, you know, call it most of it, some of it's earn out, whatever, but you know, but it's not enough. It's about more than that to them than they even thought it was going to be. So that's where I think people struggle, is to say, I thought if I made tens of millions of dollars and took chips off the table that I could live with whatever, but I can't. Either it's an ego thing, or whether it's a control thing, or just a misalignment on vision that you're super passionate about for that business. So many human things involved here. Again, after all, this is all human stuff, you know?
Well, that's the one thing that the most successful, and you've mentioned it, Rory, the most successful entrepreneurs are all in, and they've been all in, and their personality is not the normal, like, well, I'm going to diversify, I'm risk averse, they're like, no, I'm all in, and I'm going to put all my chips in the middle of the table and keep rolling. And where I've seen it, you know, you can hand them, and I mean, you and I were in a situation where they handed the founder like $70 million.
Yeah.
And he was pissed, and he went out and did it again.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't about the money. I mean, it was about the money, but it wasn't about the money. It was really about the ability to build and to grow and to do what they wanted to do and to change the landscape for that particular industry. And they were driven by you know, again, I think it's not even ego. It's a complete, it's like an inner drive that it transcends ego, transcends the wallet. And you know, and most founders go through that. And that's what makes this transition a really, really tough transition for most founders.
Yeah, well said.
But that is why it is good that you are listening to the Private Equity Experience podcast, because now you know what you're getting into, and you can be armed with good information, which we will have plenty more of in the upcoming episodes. But we will call it a wrap for this one. Thank you, Ed. Thanks, Rory. See you next time.
Doodles.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.